What if the man destined to wear the crown never made it home? At 3:47 p.m. London time, emergency calls began lighting up across two different boroughs. Sirens were heard echoing through West London, first sporadically, then like a chorus. A motorcade, partially recognized by those nearby, had come to a sudden and violent stop. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And within minutes, the world froze. Because the first name whispered through those static-riddled police radios was Prince William. Yes, that Prince William. But here's the thing. We're not just talking about a near miss. We're not just talking about another incident with the paparazzi. What happened to the future King of England today wasn't just unexpected, it was chilling. And as you'll soon discover, the crash was only the beginning. Let me take you through this carefully. Because what started as a simple traffic disruption has now unraveled into a web of silence, secrecy, and shockwaves through Buckingham Palace. The public still doesn't know the full story. But today we're going to piece it together, moment by moment. And by the time we reach the final twist, you'll understand why the crown may never be the same again. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's begin with the first trembling headline, and the royal silence that followed. A frantic city, a sudden halt. Imagine this. You're walking through Holland Park, maybe you're taking your dog out, maybe just scrolling through your phone, enjoying a rare moment of London sunshine. And then you hear it. The screech of tires. A sickening crunch. A scream. Then silence. And for a moment, the city holds its breath. Now picture two blacked-out Range Rovers, part of a discreet but standard royal convoy. One of them upturned, crushed against a median. A motorbike, twisted like a paperclip. And a crowd gathering fast, phones in hand, panic in their voices. By the time the first emergency vehicle arrived, the driver's side door was already being forced open. Not by police, not by paramedics, but by someone in a suit. Earpiece in ear, face ghost pale. You see where this is going? The man in that car. At first, the news tried to bury it. Senior royal involved in traffic incident, they wrote. Then, unnamed member of the royal family treated on scene. Then came the first leaked image. Blurry, pixelated, but undeniable. The silhouette, the jacket, the ginger beard of his protection officer sprinting toward the crash. And then, the name. Prince William, second in line to the throne, father of three, beloved face of modern monarchy. And suddenly, the incident wasn't just about traffic delays or paparazzi speculation. It was about what the nation would lose if the worst had happened. Why this story matters right now. Now, you might be thinking, okay, car crashes happen every day. Even royals aren't immune. But you'd be missing the bigger picture. Because this wasn't just a car crash. This was the heir to the British throne. This was the man positioned to be the bridge between two worlds. The tradition-bound monarchy of Queen Elizabeth and the increasingly fractured post-pandemic Britain searching for stability. And more than that, it happened at a time when the royal family can least afford another public trauma. Charles is still adapting to the crown. Kate is juggling motherhood with royal responsibilities. Harry and Meghan are across the Atlantic, estranged, unpredictable. Scandals have been bubbling beneath the surface for months. Trust is paper-thin. William isn't just a royal. He's the institution's keystone. So what happens if that keystone cracks? What happens if it breaks entirely? And what if the palace isn't telling us everything? Strange silences, conflicting timelines. One of the first things that raised eyebrows wasn't the crash itself. It was the timing. According to witnesses, the incident occurred just before 4 p.m. But the first official acknowledgement from the palace didn't come until nearly 3 hours later. 3 hours of speculation, panic, misinformation, trending hashtags, wild theories. 3 hours in which people wondered, was William unconscious? Was he trapped? Was he alone? And most damning of all, why wasn't anyone saying anything? Now, think back to previous royal emergencies. When Queen Elizabeth fell ill, updates came rapidly. When Prince Philip passed, the nation was informed almost instantly. So why the delay here? Was it caution? Or was it control? Public reaction, from concern to fear. By the time the palace released its sterile, vague statement, the Prince of Wales was involved in a minor incident this afternoon. He was assessed and is doing well. The damage was done. The public wasn't reassured. They were confused. Because almost immediately, eyewitnesses began sharing details that didn't match the official version. It wasn't minor, one man said. I saw one of the cars flipped. It was smoking. There were 6 police cars. That's not nothing. He looked dazed, like he didn't know where he was. TikToks exploded. Twitter threads analyzed every pixel of the leaked crash photo. Royal watchers, body language experts, even former security officers weighed in. And one chilling theory began to gain traction. What if the crash wasn't an accident? But William walked away, right? Here's where things get stranger. The palace insists William was assessed and doing well. But they never said he walked away. No photos, no footage, no smiling wave from a hospital doorway, no reassuring image for the press. Instead, William was completely absent from the next day's scheduled appearance. A veterans memorial he was confirmed to attend just 48 hours before. No explanation given. Was he still recovering? Was he told to rest? Or was something else going on? And then came the whispers. Within hours of his no-show, new whispers began circulating. That he was seen arriving at a private clinic late at night. That Kate had been overheard on a call, visibly distressed. That King Charles had called an emergency meeting with senior advisors, something that hadn't happened since Queen Elizabeth's passing. And then came the truly bizarre detail. A staffer, later identified only as Emma, claimed that a sealed envelope arrived at the palace just 2 hours after the crash, hand-delivered by an unmarked courier. What was in it? Who sent it? And why would an envelope matter so much? That's when things stopped feeling coincidental. That's when this stopped being a simple accident story and became something deeper, something royal. One detail everyone missed. Now, let me bring you back to the scene. Remember the bystander who first filmed the crash aftermath? In his video, barely 10 seconds long, chaotic, shaky, something strange happens at the 7-second mark. A man, tall, suited, sprints into frame. Not police, not paramedic. He's carrying a small black case, and he's moving toward the second car. Not the one William was in. Why? Who was in that car? And why did the footage get taken down just hours after it was posted? Everything changed in 24 hours. By the end of the day, royal spokespeople were pushing for calm. The official line, no need to worry. Prince William is resting with his family. Nothing to see here. But we've seen this before, haven't we? The understatement, the PR control, the silence that says more than words. And as we dig into the crash itself, the investigation, the behavior of royal staff, and the eerily familiar patterns that echo past tragedies, you'll begin to see what many are only starting to suspect. This wasn't just a random accident. And the fallout? It's just beginning. Because what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. What does it sound like when destiny derails in real time? Not metaphorically, literally. Imagine the piercing screech of metal folding in on itself. The sickening crunch of rubber snapping under velocity. The wild, violent thump of impact echoing off stone walls in central London. One moment the future King of England is gliding through the capital in a secure convoy, and the next, the world slams into silence. Not the soft silence of reverence, but the cold, panicked silence that comes just after disaster strikes, and just before the screaming starts. It was 3:46 p.m. On a Thursday, Prince William's convoy had just cleared the Shepherd's Bush roundabout, a familiar route he'd traveled countless times. There was nothing special about the day. No urgent event. No paparazzi tale. Just an ordinary return from a private engagement. A hospital visit, we later learned. But what happened next was anything but ordinary. Because less than 60 seconds later, the lead Range Rover was blindsided by an oncoming vehicle, a metallic gray hatchback traveling far too fast, driven by someone who shouldn't have been there, someone who wasn't supposed to be part of William's world in any way, and yet, now was. The moment of impact was so violent, so sudden, that locals claimed they thought a bomb had gone off. One man, walking his Labrador near the crosswalk, said he dropped his coffee and hit the pavement. It was like the ground cracked, he recalled. Like something was splitting open. I didn't know what to do. And then I saw it. The black SUV, flipped over, wheels spinning, smoke coming from underneath, and a man crawling out of the passenger side, coughing, covered in white dust. Now pause here for a moment. Ask yourself, what would you do if you witnessed that? What's your first reaction when you realize something's wrong? horribly wrong, but you're not sure what. Do you run toward it? Freeze? Pull out your phone? Or do you stand there, waiting for someone else, someone in charge, to make sense of it all? That's exactly what happened. Within moments, civilians swarmed the area. Most were stunned. A few stepped forward to help. But the strange part? The Royal Protection officers weren't the first on scene. They were in the accident. One of them, severely concussed, had to be pulled from the wreckage by two street vendors and a college student who recognized him from a royal event. And where was William? He wasn't in the flipped car. That was the lead vehicle. William, it turned out, had been in the trailing SUV, the one that tried to swerve around the collision but clipped a bollard and spun out into a side barrier. Less visible, less damaged, but still compromised. A witness described a man stumbling out of the second vehicle, holding the side of his head, one hand stretched out blindly as if trying to steady himself on a wall that wasn't there. He looked lost, she said. Not injured, but somewhere else. Like his brain hadn't caught up to what just happened. It wasn't until a young boy, no older than 12, pointed at him and said, "Mom, that's the prince," that anyone truly registered who they were looking at. Prince William, hair disheveled, shirt stained with powder from the airbag, jaw slack, eyes unfocused. And just like that, the atmosphere shifted. This wasn't just an accident anymore. This was a crisis. What followed was chaos, but the kind that felt rehearsed. Within 5 minutes, sirens had converged from all directions. Not just police and ambulances, but unmarked government vehicles. A makeshift security perimeter was established. Civilians were pushed back. Phones were confiscated. And a temporary blackout of information began. The scene was no longer a public emergency. It had become a controlled royal incident. But here's what no one expected. As first responders began tending to the injured and assessing William for potential head trauma, something odd happened. One of the police officers, an older sergeant, stepped away from the group and began speaking into a satellite phone. Not a radio, not a mobile, a satellite phone. He walked about 30 meters away, ducked behind the smoking remains of a newspaper stand, and spoke in hushed, urgent tones for over 4 minutes. For minutes. Now think about that. In the middle of an active crash scene, where seconds can save lives, this officer didn't assist, didn't give orders, didn't help clear the way for paramedics. He walked away, and when he returned, his expression was pale, grim, like he'd just been told something far worse than a car accident had taken place. So what was said? Who was on the other end of that call? And why did his behavior shift so dramatically after it? We may never know. But what we do know is this. As Prince William sat inside the back of a medical van, being examined for signs of shock, 2 other men arrived on foot, not in uniform, not wearing ID, and whispered something to his lead protection officer. Within moments, the convoy's original route was abandoned. William was not taken to the nearest hospital, as expected. He was rerouted, silently, discreetly, to a private medical facility off Kensington High Street, owned by a donor long tied to the royal family. And just like that, the official story began to shift, from a public emergency to a royal secret. Let's rewind for a second. We're now 15 minutes post-crash. Traffic in the area has been blocked. Helicopters are circling. The press is beginning to murmur. But no statement has been released. No confirmation of who was involved. No indication that the Prince of Wales is safe, injured, or even alive. Meanwhile, inside the medical facility, something unusual is happening. According to a nurse who later spoke anonymously to a tabloid and was swiftly dismissed from her position, William didn't just receive treatment. He was met by a palace doctor, not an emergency physician. A palace doctor, flown in by helicopter. Why? Why not trust the local professionals? Why the rush to bring in someone with deep ties to the royal household? Was it fear of leaks? Or was it because the nature of William's condition wasn't just physical? Let's talk about trauma. Not the visible kind, the bruises, the sprains, but the kind that doesn't show up on x-rays. The kind that sits behind the eyes. Because according to that same nurse, William barely spoke. He answered questions. He followed instructions. But he did so mechanically, detached, like he wasn't really there. And here's the kicker. He kept saying one phrase, over and over. I need to call her. No one knows exactly who her is, but several guesses have been floated. Kate. Possibly. But she was already on her way, having been alerted privately within 10 minutes of the crash. Could it have been Camilla? Unlikely. Their relationship, while cordial, isn't deeply personal. The most whispered possibility? Diana. It sounds mad, delusional, but trauma does strange things to the brain. And some witnesses claimed William looked like a boy again in that moment, as if something had been ripped open inside him. Some part of his past he'd buried deep. Think about it. Another violent crash. Another royal in danger. Another potential tragedy splashed across the headlines. And in that instant, maybe William wasn't 30-something years old. Maybe he was 15 again, standing in Balmoral, hearing the words, "Your mother's gone." Could that explain the haze? Could that explain the envelope that arrived at Buckingham Palace less than 2 hours later? Unmarked, hand-delivered, immediately whisked away by a royal aide. Because here's where things turned sharply into the bizarre. Inside that envelope, sources claim, was not a letter, but a photo. A single printed photo. What was on it? No one can say for sure. But the expression on Charles's face, when he opened it, was described as ashen. So ask yourself, is it possible this crash wasn't just an accident? Could it have been a warning? Could it have been a message? We're going to break down every angle, every inconsistency, every strange behavior from the moment the convoy left the hospital to the moment the news finally broke. But first, you need to know who was really driving the other car, because what came out later about that driver would make everything so much more complicated. How does a city as massive, as wired, and as militarized as London react when the man who could be king is pulled bleeding from a crumpled wreck? Not with calm, not with order, with chaos, royal chaos. And chaos, when mixed with protocol, politics, and panic, becomes something far more dangerous than confusion. It becomes calculated silence. The very first responders on the scene weren't actually paramedics. They weren't police. They weren't even civilians in the traditional sense. According to 3 separate eyewitness accounts, the very first person to reach Prince William's door wasn't dressed for emergency work at all. No neon vest, no ID badge, just a dark suit, navy tie, and the same steely look every palisade seems trained to adopt in the face of catastrophe. He emerged from a nondescript car parked half a block away, not part of the convoy, yet arrived faster than anyone else. He didn't rush. He walked with purpose. Straight past the twisted metal, past the other injured driver, past a mother sobbing beside her child, whose forehead was cut open from glass shards, straight to William, and said just 5 words, "We go to Plan Echo." Plan Echo, a phrase never before seen in public royal briefings, never reported by the press, never even mentioned in leaked documents from past royal security exercises. Yet there it was, spoken aloud, calmly, with total authority. And from that moment on, everything changed. The London Ambulance Service had already dispatched 2 units. They were approximately 7 minutes away. But after that phrase was uttered, 3 black-clad men arrived on high-performance motorcycles, cutting across oncoming traffic without sirens, without warning. They carried no logos, no paramedic gear, just matte black duffel bags and grim expressions. One of them knelt beside William and administered a small injection into his neck, right at the base of the skull, while the other whispered something into a comm device clipped under his collar. This wasn't first aid. This wasn't tree-off. This was extraction. And what about the other victims? The woman in the passenger seat of the hatchback had broken ribs. The child in the back seat was howling in pain. The other royal security guard from the lead car was unconscious and slumped over the steering wheel. But none of the black-suited newcomers even looked at them. Not once. Think about that. In a democratic society, even royalty is supposedly subject to the same laws, the same emergency response protocols, the same basic humanitarian principles. But not today. Not here. Not when Plan Echo had been activated. Here's what we know happened next. At exactly 3:52 p.m., London Fire Brigade units were held at a stoplight 3 blocks away, despite having clear access to the scene. Orders from above. One of them was heard saying, the first standard ambulance was diverted to a parallel street and instructed to wait. Meanwhile, a private unmarked vehicle, registered to a company known to provide services to royal estates, pulled up with its windows blacked out and a driver who refused to identify himself. William was ushered in without protest. Not on a stretcher, not under escort, just placed inside. The vehicle left without lights or sirens. At this point, no one outside the immediate royal inner circle had any idea what was happening. No press, no public, not even some local police on the scene. Officers were visibly confused. One junior constable reportedly asked, "Was that the Prince of Wales?" and was swiftly pulled aside by a superior who told him to erase his bodycam footage. That's right, erase it. When the first real paramedics arrived, the ones the public trusts, the ones trained for mass casualty events, they were greeted by silence and tension. The air was thick with unspoken instructions. One medic, in a panicked moment, asked where the VIP had been taken. The reply? There was no VIP here. But that wasn't the scariest part. The scariest part was what happened when a bystander, a woman in her 40s, just passing through the neighborhood, raised her phone to take a photo of the scene. She hadn't realized who was involved. She wasn't part of any conspiracy. She just wanted to document a bad crash. Within seconds, a tall man in plain clothes grabbed her wrist, identified himself with a flashed badge, its text too small to read, and told her, in no uncertain terms, "Delete that now, or hand over your phone." She tried to resist. He said only this: "This is a national security matter. You'll be escorted if you don't comply." National security. For a traffic accident. Why? Because the moment William's identity became tied to that crash, it wasn't just about injuries or damages anymore. It was about the perception of control, the continuity of the monarchy, the appearance that the man destined to lead Britain and the Commonwealth beyond was invincible, untouchable, unbreakable. And this broke that illusion. So the cover-up began in real time. News outlets who got word of the crash early, mostly local stringers and traffic scanners, began publishing vague reports around 4:10 p.m., major collision near Kensington. They said, 2 cars involved. Emergency response underway. But then the headlines vanished. Archived pages were wiped. Tweets deleted. One local blogger even received an email from what he described as a gov.uk black domain, ordering him to suspend commentary until official confirmation is released. And what was that official confirmation? It wouldn't arrive until 6:42 p.m., almost 3 full hours after William had been loaded into that unmarked vehicle. 3 hours of speculation, rumors, conspiracy, and fear. But here's the thing. The statement didn't confirm anything. It used passive, sterile language. A member of the royal family was involved in a minor road incident this afternoon. No serious injuries were reported. That was it. No names. No locations. No hospitals. No images. No quotes. Nothing human. Compare that to previous events. When Queen Elizabeth had a simple fall in the palace, it was public within 45 minutes. When Philip had a minor fender bender in 2019, Buckingham Palace issued a full statement within 2 hours, with photos, police logs, and even quotes from both drivers. But this was different, because something else happened in the window between the crash and the statement. And it involves a security breach that no one in the royal family is willing to acknowledge. We'll get to that. But for now, let's focus on a smaller, stranger detail. One most people missed entirely. At 5:34 p.m., a private helicopter was spotted hovering above the crash site. It wasn't an air ambulance. It wasn't news media. It wasn't a police chopper. It was matte black, unmarked, and hovered for approximately 45 seconds before veering west. Its flight path was never logged. Its tail number was never recorded. But one bystander managed to snap a photo. Grainy, blurry, but real. The aircraft had a distinctive triangular marking near the rear rotor, a symbol known to be associated with a defunct royal logistics firm that supposedly closed its books in 2017. So what was it doing in the air? Was it surveillance? Was it extraction? Or was it something more chilling? A warning. There's a theory gaining traction among those who follow royal security circles. A theory that the crash wasn't just a fluke, wasn't just a reckless driver on a side street. That perhaps, just perhaps, someone knew William would be there. That the route had been compromised. That the gray hatchback wasn't a civilian vehicle at all. That it had been deliberately inserted into the convoy's blind spot. Too paranoid? Maybe. But here's what breaks the pattern. The driver of the other car didn't go to the hospital. She didn't leave in an ambulance. She didn't file a police statement. In fact, Her identity wasn't released at all, not even once. No media outlet, not the BBC, not the Mirror, not even the Daily Mail, published her name. Think about that. In a country where every pub fight makes headlines, where even minor royals can't sneeze without scrutiny, this driver vanished. Why? Because she never was a civilian? Because she was someone else entirely? Someone with a purpose? We'll come back to her soon. Very soon. But right now, we need to talk about Kate. Because while the scene on the street was chaos and cover-up, what unfolded behind palace walls was something else entirely, raw panic. And when the call finally reached her, and she heard the words, "There's been an accident," her first instinct wasn't to cry. It was to act. But what she did next, and who tried to stop her, sent shockwaves through the royal inner circle. And what came next would change everything. Have you ever wondered what it feels like when the palace itself begins to panic? Not the theatrical kind. Not the carefully choreographed concern you see during public health scares or tabloid scandals. But real, unfiltered, gut-punch panic. The kind that rips protocol apart and forces powerful people into vulnerable positions. That was the mood inside Kensington Palace the moment the call came in. Not from the news. Not from official dispatch. But from a scrambled private line routed through royal security. A call placed by a shaken, half-conscious member of Prince William's detail, barely able to speak. The phone rang inside the communications room, a modest, unassuming space tucked between two ancient drawing rooms, where aides typically sip Earl Grey while handling scheduling logistics. But this time, the woman who answered wasn't met with polite updates or a routine confirmation. She heard static, then coughing, then, "We need Echo Red. Echo Red. Possible blackout. He's down. William, he's down." Within seconds, alarms were triggered, not blaring sirens, but subtle buzzes, hidden lights embedded in the ceilings, known only to the most senior staff. The code words were rare, almost never used. Echo Red didn't mean an attack. It didn't mean a threat to the monarchy. It meant the heir was in danger, physically or psychologically, and the truth must be contained. Upstairs, Catherine, Princess of Wales, had just returned from an engagement of her own, a charity event for displaced families in outer Surrey. She was still in heels, her blouse still crisp from the press team's final check. But all of that collapsed the moment she was intercepted by a trembling aide halfway up the stairs. One look, that's all it took. The color drained from her face. "No," she whispered. "No, not again." She didn't even ask what happened. Her body reacted before her brain did. She turned, shoes clicking against the old wooden floor, and marched directly to the underground garage where her personal car, a silver Audi often mistaken for staff transport, was parked. But as she reached for the door handle, a hand stopped her. Not just any hand, a gloved one, from a man she'd never seen before. He wore no royal insignia, no household crest, just a jet-black coat, black gloves, and an unreadable expression. "You can't leave," he said flatly. "I'm going to my husband," she snapped. "There's been a directive." "From who?" He didn't answer. That was the moment Catherine's voice broke. Not into tears, but into fury. Controlled, royal fury. The kind that echoes across centuries of power, yet is only used in moments of deep betrayal. "I don't care what the directive is," she hissed. "Either you let me go, or I make the call that undoes all of this." It worked. Because whatever this man's instructions had been, they didn't prepare him for the sheer force of Catherine's composure in a crisis. He stepped back. She slid into the driver's seat, keys already in hand. But before she could reverse, her own head of security ran into the garage, out of breath, waving frantically. "Ma'am, please wait." She did. Just barely. "There's more to this than an accident," he said. "You'll want to hear it from the king." At that moment, she froze. The king? Why would Charles be involved already? Unless something wasn't being said. Something far worse. Back inside, Catherine was guided into a secure room. No windows, reinforced walls. One of the few places in Kensington designed for containment scenarios. Inside, a satellite line was already open. On screen, King Charles. Pale, hollow-eyed, his usually poised tone clipped and raw. "Catherine," he began, skipping formalities. "He's stable, conscious, but not out of the woods." She exhaled, half relief, half fear. "But," Charles continued, his voice dropping into something colder, more deliberate. This may not have been an accident. Silence. Not from shock, but because she had already feared this exact thing. Was it Harry? She asked, voice shaking slightly. Charles looked startled. No, nothing like that. But someone interfered with the route. That changed everything. Because royal motorcade routes are changed frequently. Sometimes minutes before departure, and only a handful of people ever have access. For someone to intercept the plan meant there had been a breach. A leak. Or worse, someone inside was playing a long game. Catherine's next words were chilling in their calm. How far does this go? We don't know, Charles replied. Yet. Then came the next twist. I need you to come to Sandringham, he added. Immediately. Quietly. Bring no staff. She blinked. Why Sandringham? Because there's something you need to see, Charles said, and I won't speak of it over the phone. That alone sent a shiver down her spine. Charles wasn't known for dramatics. If anything, he was infuriatingly restrained. But something in his voice, in the way he said see, instead of no, it felt off. Urgent. And terrifying. The palace was spiraling. News crews were starting to circle the crash site. Social media had picked up on police chatter. The hashtags were growing. Hashtag royal accident. Hashtag where is William? Hashtag Buckingham silence. The press office was floundering. Every junior aide was being bombarded with requests, and no one had clearance to say anything. All communications were being funneled through one person, a woman named Tabitha Shaw, rarely seen, never quoted, but known behind closed doors as the palace's crisis sculptor. Her job wasn't to tell the truth. Her job was to sculpt perception. And right now, perception was collapsing. A dozen calls had come in from Downing Street alone, demanding briefings. The Archbishop of Canterbury had left a handwritten note at the palace gate. And even Canada's Prime Minister issued a cryptic tweet saying, "Our thoughts are with the people of the United Kingdom tonight." Why would he say that? Why people of the UK, and not William directly? Did he know something others didn't? Back in her quarters, Catherine changed into something muted, black jeans, a gray sweater. Clothes that wouldn't draw attention. She kissed the children, reassured them with a trembling smile, and instructed the nanny not to turn on the television. She didn't cry. Not yet. There was something about the way the day was unfolding that felt familiar. Not in a comforting way, but in a patterned way. Like déjà vu. Like history repeating itself, not because of fate, but because of orchestration. As her car pulled away from the palace, avoiding main roads, the enormity of what was happening began to settle like frost on her spine. William had survived, but they weren't telling her the whole story. And someone, somewhere inside that gilded circle, wanted to keep it that way. But that's not the worst part. Because even as Catherine sped towards Sandringham to uncover the truth, another family member, far removed from London, was already making moves. And what Harry said that night, thousands of miles away, in Montecito, would ignite the next wave of outrage, betrayal, and heartbreak. Have you ever seen someone hold themselves together so tightly, they almost vanish? That's what it looked like. Catherine, Princess of Wales, the poised royal figure who'd spent over a decade mastering the impossible role of royal wife, mother, symbol, and future queen, now reduced to a silhouette behind tinted glass, knuckles white on the steering wheel, her entire body rigid with tension. It wasn't just fear. It was suppression, the pressure to keep it all in, the tears, the rage, the dread. Because what she felt inside, as she drove away from her children and into the mouth of a rapidly escalating royal nightmare, was the one thing she could never show, uncertainty. Minutes earlier, she had stood in her children's playroom, pretending everything was fine, pretending that Daddy was just delayed, that there was no need to worry. George, sensitive and sharp-eyed, had asked, "Is he hurt?" She'd smiled, that quiet, practiced royal smile, and replied, "No, darling. He just had a long day." But inside, she was splintering, because no one had given her straight answers. Not about the crash, not about the route breach, and certainly not about the sealed envelope that had arrived at Buckingham Palace. Her husband, the man she shared a life with under constant scrutiny, had been in a high-impact collision involving multiple security failures, and yet every door she knocked on gave her the same vacant response. "We're handling it." What does that even mean? When it's your husband's name trending across every platform, when the public is demanding answers, when the walls of royal protocol are starting to creak under pressure, when even the king is summoning you to a secluded estate and refusing to speak over the phone. It means something is rotten at the center of the crown, and Kate could feel it. The ride to Sandringham was slow, winding, intentionally routed away from the M25 to avoid aerial surveillance. She wasn't escorted by the usual motorcade. Only one plainclothes officer accompanied her, seated silently in the passenger seat of an inconspicuous Land Rover. The man didn't speak, didn't look at her. His only job was to ensure she arrived. But the silence between them was loud, deafening even. It spoke of secrets. Every now and then, she caught glimpses in the side mirror. The eerie stillness of the countryside, the sun dipping behind clouds, the surreal contrast between natural peace and internal panic. Her thoughts, swirling. Every scenario, every possibility. Was William unconscious? Had he suffered head trauma? Was this an assassination attempt? A threat to the line of succession? Had the children been placed in a secondary location as precaution? And why wasn't she allowed to speak to him directly? Her phone vibrated. Once. It was a text from an unknown number. All it said was, "Check under seat." Heart racing. She waited until they reached a patch of thick woods before casually shifting in her seat and sliding her hand underneath. Her fingers brushed something, a flash drive. Small, cold, wrapped in a blank envelope. No name, no note, just the device. She pocketed it discreetly. Then came the second message. Do not trust Charles. Her heart stopped. She looked up sharply, meeting the eyes of the driver in the mirror. His expression hadn't changed. Still blank. Still unreadable. But now unsettling. She said nothing. The car turned onto the narrow private road leading to the Sandringham estate. Guards waved them through. The gates closed behind them with a quiet finality that felt more like entrapment than protection. As they pulled up to the main house, a butler was already waiting, one she didn't recognize. His presence, too, was unusual. Charles preferred minimal staff when visiting. But tonight, every inch of the estate felt staged. She stepped inside, expecting to be led to a sitting room, or perhaps to Charles's private study. Instead, she was escorted to a cellar. Yes, a cellar. His Majesty will meet you shortly, the butler said, before turning and walking away, leaving her in the cool, dimly lit room, surrounded by old wines and shadowy walls that felt too thick, too heavy with memory. She wasn't alone. There were eyes on her. She could feel it, but she didn't flinch. She waited. Minutes passed. Then footsteps. Not Charles. A woman. Tall, early 60s, silver blonde hair in a tight bun, carrying an old leather file. She introduced herself only as Margaret. No title, no surname, just Margaret. Before the king comes, she said softly, there's something you need to see. Something Diana wanted you to see. Kate stiffened. Her mouth went dry. I don't understand, she said. Yes, Margaret replied, opening the file. You do. And inside that file were letters. Handwritten. Signed, Diana. Some dated before 1997. Some after. Her hands trembled as she reached for the top one. Kate, it began. If you're reading this, something has happened to William. The room tilted. Her knees nearly gave way. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was forewarning. Someone had planned this. Someone had known this day would come. And Diana, from beyond the grave, had tried to warn them. Just as the door creaked open behind her, and King Charles entered, alone, looking exhausted, grave, and, for the first time in her life, afraid. But it wasn't the fear of a father. It was the fear of a man whose house of cards was about to collapse. Catherine, he said quietly, there's something I need to tell you about the crash. Her heart pounded in her chest. But before he could finish, her phone lit up. One word. Harry. He was calling. And everything froze. Because what he was about to reveal from Montecito would ignite a firestorm the palace would never outrun. What do you say when your estranged brother nearly dies, and you weren't even told? What do you feel when the institution that raised you, schooled you, disciplined you, silenced you, goes into total lockdown over an accident involving your only sibling, but still doesn't bother to pick up the phone? And what do you do when the whole world is spinning, begging for answers, and somehow, against all odds, you know exactly what the palace is about to cover up, because you've seen them do it before? Prince Harry knew something was wrong the moment his phone lit up with a BBC alert. It wasn't explicit, just one of those vague, ominous banners. Senior royal involved in car incident. That was it. No name, no title, no location. But his gut didn't hesitate. He turned to Megan, who was seated across from him at their Montecito kitchen island, sipping chamomile tea, and simply said, "It's William." Megan looked up, startled. "How do you know?" "I just do," he said, already dialing. It rang. Once. Twice. Voicemail. He called again, this time a direct line to a private royal security liaison. No answer. He tried Charles. Nothing. He tried a third number, an old contact from the communications team. Still no response. And that's when Harry's expression changed. From concern to cold realization. "They're doing it again," he muttered. "They're locking it down." "Of course they are," Megan whispered, placing her cup down slowly. "Because it's real this time." Those 6 words hung in the air like fog. Because what she meant was simple. This wasn't just another blunder. This wasn't optics. This wasn't some rogue aide leaking gossip to the Daily Mail. This was an existential threat to the crown. And Harry? He'd seen it coming. Not the crash itself, no, but the environment that led to it. The silence, the control, the emotional negligence, the rigid obsession with image over humanity. He had warned them. In interviews. In his book. In tearful conversations behind closed doors. "You're pushing him too far," he had once told Charles. "You're giving him everything and letting him break under the weight." And now? Now the future king had nearly died in a road accident. An accident no one was calling an accident. An accident no one in the family bothered to tell Harry about. So he picked up the phone again. This time, he called a private contact, an old friend who'd once worked in royal security before moving abroad. The man answered immediately. "I need to know what's going on," Harry said, skipping greetings. The voice on the other end hesitated, then said, "All I can tell you is this, he's alive. But they're scrambling. The route was changed last minute." "Not by William." Harry went silent. "Changed last minute. Not by William." Someone inside had intervened. That was all he needed to hear. He hung up, walked out to the patio, stared into the golden California light, and exhaled slowly. The way you do when your body knows something that your mind hasn't caught up to yet. When Megan joined him, he finally said it. "They're going to spin this. They're going to make it sound like nothing happened." She nodded. But it wasn't nothing. "No," Megan agreed softly. "It was a warning." To who? That was the question they didn't want to ask out loud. Because it opened a door neither of them were ready to walk through. But let's not pretend Harry wasn't thinking it. The idea that his brother, the only person who truly understood the weight of their upbringing, might have been targeted by the very system meant to protect him, wasn't absurd. It was plausible, because Harry had lived it. The suffocation, the surveillance, the curated narratives, the invisible leash of duty. And Megan? She'd seen it even more clearly. From the outside. From the moment she walked into the palace walls and realized she wasn't being embraced, she was being measured. So when the calls finally started coming in, hours later, first from a vague spokesperson, then from a concerned royal aide, Harry didn't answer with warmth. He answered with fire. "Why didn't anyone call me earlier?" he snapped. "We didn't have all the information." "Rubbish. You knew. You just didn't want me to know. His Royal Highness is stable, You don't get to His Royal Highness me today," Harry growled. "That's my brother." And with that, he hung up. The rage, the helplessness, the betrayal, boiling over inside him. And then, he made a decision. One that would trigger a global media earthquake. He opened his encrypted video message app, the one he used for private press drops. And he recorded a 21-second clip. It started simply. "My brother, Prince William, was in a car crash today." Pause. "I only learned about it through the news." Longer pause. Barely contained emotion. "I want you all to ask yourselves, what else haven't they told us?" And with that, he sent it. Straight to 5 international journalists, 2 activist networks, and 1 U.S. senator who had previously criticized the monarchy's lack of transparency. Within 20 minutes, it was everywhere. Trending on X, flooding Instagram. Thumbnails on YouTube reading, "Harry Strikes Back." Headlines screaming, "Harry blindsides palace with late-night video." The press office at Buckingham Palace went into freefall. Because this wasn't just a rogue statement. This was a declaration of war. Public, undeniable, emotional, and worst of all for the palace, it was sympathetic. People weren't criticizing Harry. They were agreeing with him. Why wasn't he told? What are they hiding? Is William really okay? Was it deliberate? Is the monarchy collapsing? It was a flood they couldn't contain. Back in Montecito, Megan paced the living room. I think we've just crossed a line, she whispered. Harry nodded, eyes glued to his phone, as messages from former royal staffers began pouring in. Some cryptic, some terrified. One simply said, "You were right. We should have left when we had the chance." And then another, from a blocked number. For words. They found the photo. He froze. "Meg," he said, voice low. "There's a photo, and it's circulating." "A photo of what?" "I don't know," he said. "But it has something to do with the crash. And someone's terrified of it leaking." Now the stakes had changed. Again, it wasn't just about survival. It wasn't about truth. It was about evidence. Something physical. Something the palace was moving mountains to bury. And Harry? Harry was no longer just a concerned brother. He was a liability. But the thing about liabilities is, they don't stay silent. Especially not when the future of the crown is wrapped around a single secret image. An image that was already beginning to leak. What happens when the public starts piecing together the truth faster than the institution built to control it? What do you do when your carefully crafted messaging is ripped apart in real time by TikTok sleuths, satellite sleuths, ex-analysts, and the unforgiving algorithm of the internet itself? You scramble, you twist, you obfuscate, and then, when that fails, you bury. That's exactly what the palace tried to do in the 24 hours following the crash that rocked the House of Windsor. But the story wasn't a flat line anymore. It was a tidal wave. And no matter how many carefully worded press statements they released, they couldn't outrun one crucial fact. The public didn't believe them. The first headline to break mainstream? A single, cautiously written article from the Telegraph titled, "Royal Motorcade Involved in Traffic Incident." Prince William assessed. The wording was textbook crisis PR, sterile, non-committal, intentionally vague. Assessed. Not hospitalized. Not injured. Just assessed. But the comments section exploded. Assessed? That's not a medical term. That's a political dodge. So why did someone say he was unconscious at the scene? Where are the CCTV videos? If he's fine, where's the proof? Within minutes, screenshots surfaced of a now-deleted post from a paramedic who had claimed a high-profile male in his early 40s was rushed to a private clinic with suspected neurological trauma. The post was pulled. The account was suspended. But the damage had already been done. People smelled the rot. And it only got worse. By midday, there were 3 competing narratives being pushed by various arms of the British media. The official line. William was in a minor incident, lightly shaken, and resting at home with family. No further details provided. The anonymous insider leak. William had suffered a head injury but was stable, and the accident may have involved a mechanical failure. Still under review. The civilian eyewitness accounts. The crash was violent. The cars were badly mangled. One royal guard was unconscious. A mysterious black vehicle with no plates arrived and took William away before any ambulance made it to the scene. 3 narratives, all contradicting each other, and none matching the reality that was playing out online. Because now, digital investigators were stepping in. Satellite images, street cam footage, traffic data. Even time-stamped Uber receipts were being analyzed by amateur analysts who cared more about truth than protocol. A TikTok account with less than 1,000 followers suddenly exploded overnight after posting a thread titled, 10 Inconsistencies in the Palace's Statement About William's Crash. The first inconsistency? The location. The palace said the incident occurred near Kensington. But images from the scene, including the leaked police coordinates, placed the crash closer to Ladbroke Grove, a notably less secure stretch of road that royal convoys almost never use unless there's a diversion. The second inconsistency? The time. Palace records placed the crash around 4 p.m., but eyewitnesses began posting time-stamped photos from 3:44 p.m., showing a helicopter already hovering above the area. A helicopter that, according to aviation tracking software, didn't belong to any public service. The third inconsistency? The identity of the second driver. To this day, no one had named her. Not the press. Not the police. Not even the tabloids, which never miss a chance to exploit scandal. She had simply disappeared. One Reddit user posted a theory that sent shivers down every spine reading. There is no second driver. It was staged. The other car was a plant. Too extreme? Maybe. But others noticed something else. A fire station near the scene reported being told to stand down minutes before the crash. Not after. Before. And then came the first major crack in the palace wall. A leaked photo. Grainy. Dark. Clearly shot from a high window. It showed William, unmistakably, slumped in the back seat of a black SUV. His eyes closed. His shirt bloodied at the collar. The palace went into meltdown. Within 30 minutes of the photo going viral, major outlets were issued D-notices, informal government requests urging them not to publish material that could threaten national security. These are rare, almost sacred, reserved for terrorist threats or intelligence leaks. But a photo of a prince in distress? What did that say about how fragile the monarchy had become? And more importantly, what were they trying to protect? The media began imploding on itself. Even pro-monarchy outlets were now walking a dangerous line. The Daily Mail ran a "what we know so far" timeline, but buried deep in the article was a subtle dig. The absence of images or footage from the scene has been described by analysts as highly unusual. Translation? We're being lied to, and we know it. Meanwhile, American media didn't hold back. CNN ran the headline, "Royal Secrecy Returns." What are they hiding about Prince William's crash? The New York Times demanded transparency. Even Vanity Fair ran a cover story with the question, "Prince or prisoner?" And then came the clip. A 10-second video posted anonymously to X, uploaded from a burner account, timestamped within the hour of the crash. It showed the street corner, 2 wrecked cars, and a male voice, panicked, yelling into a phone. "They hit the wrong car. I told them. Wales was in the second one." Why didn't they? Cut. Gone. Deleted within minutes. But it had already been saved. Reposted. Analyzed. The phrase "they hit the wrong car" spread like wildfire. Who was they? And who were they supposed to hit? The implications were chilling. Was this an attack? An orchestrated scare? A message? Or something far more ancient? Something whispered about Diana for years? A royal accident. That wasn't an accident at all. And then came the next twist. One no one was ready for. The insurance records. Someone, perhaps a whistleblower, perhaps just a rogue actor, leaked an internal claims report from a luxury vehicle insurer. The car registered to the royal convoy, claim filed for vehicular sabotage, filed not by police, not by a civilian, but by the palace legal department. Within 3 hours of the crash. Sabotage, not mechanical failure, not negligence. Sabotage. Why would the palace use that word? What did they know that they hadn't shared with police? And why, then, were they still calling it a minor incident in public? The contradiction broke open the dam. Petitions began circulating. MPs demanded answers. Former royal guards took to the airwaves, cautiously, anonymously, speaking of loose protocols, unauthorized access to route data, and a tightening grip from the inside. And through all of it, William remained unseen. No photo, no video, no statement in his own voice. Just silence. And that silence was becoming deafening. Even royalists were turning. One longtime palace supporter tweeted, "I've defended them through everything. The weddings, the scandals, the Netflix series. But if they don't show us that man's face within 48 hours, I'm done." Because it wasn't about gossip anymore. It was about trust. And the institution was losing it by the second. When a call comes in involving a high-profile motorcade, especially one attached to the heir to the British throne, police don't just respond. They descend. And in the case of Prince William's crash, they didn't just descend fast. They arrived armed. Because the protocols aren't just about protection. They're about containment. From the moment the 999 call registered an impact involving royal vehicles, the area around Ladbroke Grove transformed from a quiet residential artery into something closer to a red zone. Marked cars were rerouted. Surveillance drones were launched. Snipers were placed on rooftops. Yes, really. The Royal Protection Command had been preparing for years for something like this. But what they found when they arrived was not what they expected. Because the crash didn't look like a random collision. It looked staged. Clean. Too clean. Let's break it down. 2 vehicles involved, a black Range Rover and a gray compact hatchback. The Range Rover, part of William's convoy, had damage consistent with a broadside hit, but the angle was strange. The impact was directly across the rear driver's side door. Not a natural hit from someone running a light. It was surgical, deliberate, as if someone had aimed. The hatchback, meanwhile, had very little frontal damage. In fact, the airbag had not deployed. That was the first red flag. A collision hard enough to flip a multi-ton SUV should have triggered every safety feature in the attacking car. But this one, it looked like it had tapped the Range Rover, not totaled it. And yet somehow, the royal vehicle had been spun almost 90 degrees and landed on its side. Physics didn't line up. Unless, of course, a third vehicle had been involved. One that disappeared. And that's exactly what several officers started whispering about as they began combing the area. Because there were 2 sets of skid marks, 2 directions of glass spray, but only 2 cars remained. So where was the third? Gone before they arrived. Gone before CCTV kicked in. Gone before any traffic camera footage could be pulled. Now pause for a moment and think about that. London is the most surveilled city in Europe. Every major road, every corner, every alley. Watched. Yet in the heart of that surveillance net, a third vehicle vanishes. And the driver of the gray hatchback? The one supposedly responsible. Unconscious when police arrived. Breathing. No ID. No phone. No purse. Not even fingerprints. Literally, her hands were bandaged. No usable prints. No way to scan. When police attempted facial recognition, her image didn't register with any database, public or private. Almost like she didn't exist. That's when an officer, one who'd worked in counterterrorism before being reassigned to domestic dignitary security, began muttering the words that would haunt the investigation from that moment forward. This wasn't an accident, he said to his partner. This was a probe. A probe. Meaning, a deliberate, contained test. A warning. A message. And if you believe that, it explains a lot. Why the woman had no identity. Why the damage didn't match the physics. Why the entire royal press office was muzzled. But then came the discovery that turned this incident from alarming to terrifying. Under the rear passenger seat of the flipped Range Rover, the side William typically sits on, officers found a small, magnetic listening device. A bug. Not military grade. Not cheap, either. The kind used by private surveillance firms in high-risk corporate espionage. Battery-powered. Live. It had been running for at least 3 hours before the crash. That discovery changed the tone of the investigation instantly. What had it picked up? Conversations? GPS coordinates? Royal protocol chatter? The device was quickly bagged and handed off to an MI5 handler who appeared within 40 minutes of the scene, uninvited. His credentials checked out. His presence, however, was unexplained. He gave no report, took the device, vanished. And just like that, a criminal investigation became a national security blackout. The investigating officer, a 19-year veteran named D.I. Cooper, was later placed on special leave. When asked by colleagues why, he simply said, "Too many ghosts in this one." What did he mean? The ghosts of what exactly? But we're not done yet. Because the strangest detail of all wasn't mechanical. It wasn't forensic. It wasn't even technological. It was biological. Police at the scene found traces of blood on the driver's side headrest of the Range Rover. Not surprising in a crash. But when samples were taken for routine analysis, the lab results raised a massive flag. The blood type didn't match Williams. And when cross-referenced with the passenger manifest of the convoy, protection officers, drivers, aides, no one matched. A foreign body had been in the vehicle. Briefly. Unseen. Unaccounted for. That blood, it belonged to someone else entirely. So who the hell was in that car? Theories began to swirl, even within the department. Was it a spy? A decoy? An intruder who'd planted the listening device? Or worse, someone William knew. Because there were other signs, a discarded phone, wiped clean, cigarette ash in the rear floorboard, despite William being a non-smoker. A faint scent of jasmine perfume embedded in the upholstery, too faint to ID, but strong enough that officers remembered it. And above all that, one final detail. A small envelope. Plain. Unmarked. Found lodged in the glove compartment of the rear passenger door. Inside. A photograph. Not digital. Polaroid. Black and white. Of a woman. Smiling. It wasn't Kate. It wasn't Camilla. And it definitely wasn't Diana. The image was old, faded, but real. And on the back, one line. He looks just like her. The envelope was turned over to a palace courier who arrived, again, without being summoned. Its contents were never seen again. The report was sealed. The officer who found it, reassigned to traffic duty in Wales. Do you feel the pattern? Someone is cleaning. Scrubbing the scene. Scrubbing the questions. Scrubbing the truth. And in the days that followed, every officer who worked the case was asked to sign an extended NDA under the Official Secrets Act, an extremely rare protocol for a vehicle crash. But it was too late, because one officer kept a copy of the preliminary scene notes and leaked 3 lines to a journalist friend. Those lines. Scene does not match impact. Unidentified blood sample in royal vehicle. Photograph discovered and removed before forensics team arrived. They were published on an obscure blog. Buried. Ignored at first. Until they weren't. Until the New York Post, The Guardian, and The Times started picking them up. And suddenly, the palace wasn't just fighting social media rumors. They were fighting documented leaks. But the thing that pushed it all into the realm of surreal? A private investigator, operating independently, filed a Freedom of Information request for traffic cam footage on the crash day. What he got back wasn't denial. It was an envelope. Inside, a single USB drive. The footage? All black. All 34 cameras. Offline. For exactly 11 minutes. And the timestamp? 3:41 p.m. to 3:52 p.m. The exact window of the crash. Which begs the question, who could black out 34 cameras across London in a 10-minute window and leave no trace? The answer? Only someone inside. Inside the system. Inside the palace. Inside the crown. But the real twist? What William said when he woke up the next day shook the last remaining believers in the royal narrative. Because when he opened his eyes, he whispered a name that hadn't been spoken in years, a name erased from royal records, and a name that shouldn't have existed at all.